He invited an alien to dinner, only to discover she was royalty. The artificial sky above Ganymede Station flickered for a moment, its simulated sun hesitating between. Afternoon and early evening Theo Vance barely noticed he had more immediate problems, like the fact that his bag of groceries had just split open, spilling its contents across the market walkway. "Ah, come on," he muttered, watching an overpriced synth apple roll toward a drainage grate. He lunged for it, nearly colliding with someone's legs. A hand, slender and oddly luminescent under the station's artificial lighting, got there. First, long fingers curled around the runaway apple and held it out to him. He looked up and promptly forgot what he was doing. The woman in front of him was striking, blue-skinned with iridescent yellow hair that caught the light strands of woven gold. Her long ears twitched slightly, as if responding to his sudden stillness, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard, violet deep and filled with an amused intelligence that made Theo feel entirely too ordinary. "You dropped this," she said, her voice smooth but carrying the faintest hint of an accent he couldn't place. Theo blinked. Yep, that's mine." "Thanks." He took the apple, trying very hard to act like he wasn't starring. His brain scrambled for something intelligent to say, but all he could manage was, "You new around here." The woman's lips twitched as if suppressing a smile. "You could say that." He nodded, fumbling to gather the rest of his spilled groceries. Right, you visiting from somewhere?" "Because you don't exactly have that. I've been stuck on Ganymede too long. Look." Now she did smile, a small knowing thing I'm passing through, getting a sense of things. Theo didn't know what that meant, but he also didn't know why he suddenly felt like his day had just taken an unexpected turn. Maybe it was the way she spoke, like someone who was used to holding back more than she was saying, or maybe it was just the fact that Ganymede Station rarely saw anyone like her, graceful, poised, and entirely out of place among the grease-stained mechanics and hair traders that made up the station's usual crowd. Either way, before he could think better of it, the words were already out of his mouth. "You hungry?" "I was going to cook something at my place, nothing fancy, but if you want a decent meal, you're welcome to join." The moment the invitation left his lips, Theo had exactly two thoughts. One, that was probably the dumbest thing he'd ever done, and two, why the hell did she look like she was actually considering it? There was a pause, a heartbeat of a moment, where she seemed to weigh 100 different possibilities. Then, to his complete surprise, she nodded. "I'd like that," and just like that, Theo Vance, scrappy repairman, habitual overthinker, and unintentional risk-taker, found himself leading a mysterious alien woman back to his tiny apartment for dinner. The trip back to Theo's apartment was by all measures entirely ordinary, except for the part where he was leading an impossibly elegant alien woman through the winding, slightly grimy corridors of Ganymede Station's lower district. Silera, as she'd introduced herself on the way, moved with an effortless grace that made Theo feel even more like the clumsy station-born tech rat that he was. She didn't gawk at the flickering neon signs or wrinkle her nose at the ever-present scent of recycled air and machine grease. If anything, she studied her surroundings with quiet curiosity, as if Ganymede's patched-up metal walls and overworked ventilation ducts held some deep philosophical meaning. Theo, on the other hand, was hyper-aware of everything. He was suddenly noticing just how bad the station's artificial gravity generators had been acting up lately, how the floor let out the occasional unsettling creak beneath their steps, how the neighboring apartment 2 doors down still hadn't fixed that damn pipe that hissed like an angry lizard. "So," he said, as they rounded the last corner, "I got to ask, what made you say yes to dinner? I mean, I'm guessing you've got other options, besides eating whatever I'm about to attempt to cook." Silera tilted her head. "Considering you're the first person in a long time who's invited me to something without expecting anything in return." Theo snorted. "Yeah, well, don't be too impressed. You haven't tried my cooking yet." He stopped in front of his door, punched in the manual override when the biometric scanner predictably failed, and stepped inside. It wasn't much, a single-room unit with an attached kitchenette, a fold-out cot, and a view screen that only worked if you hit it at the right angle. The walls were lined with shelves full of half-dismantled tech spare parts and the occasional old-world artifact that Theo had scavenged from ship graveyards. One corner held a lopsided desk covered scattered circuit boards. A single overhead light flickered once, then held steady. "Home sweet home," he said, Stepping aside to let Solara enter, she took it all in with an expression Theo couldn't quite read, not disgust which was a relief, not pity, which he would have hated just curiosity. She ran her fingers along the nearest shelf, pausing on a small rusted mechanical bird Theo had been meaning to fix for months. "This is yours?" she asked. Theo shrugged. "Yeah, don't let the mess fool you. Everything's exactly where I lost it." She smiled at that, but didn't press further. Instead, she turned toward the kitchenette. "And this is where you cook?" "That's the idea. The execution, however, is usually debatable." He stepped into the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. "All right, let's see. I was going to make something simple. Pasta, maybe. I think I still have some sauce packets that aren't expired." Solara leaned against the counter, watching with an expression of mild amusement. "You sound very confident." "Your culinary skills?" "Oh, I'm absolutely not," Theo said, rummaging through a cabinet. "But the trick is to act like you are so the food doesn't know you're afraid of it." Solara let out a soft laugh. "That's a philosophy I've never heard before. Works in other areas too. Fixing tech, negotiating rent with your landlord, pretending you meant to trip over your own feet." He gave her a grin. "It's a very versatile strategy." She shook her head, still smiling. "Then by all means proceed." Theo got to work the stove. After a brief argument, finally agreed to turn on. He tossed some noodles into boiling water and carefully ripped open a sauce packet, trying not to think about how long it had been sitting in his cabinet. Meanwhile, Solara continued her quiet study of his apartment, occasionally picking up a gadget or running her fingers over an old book's spine. After a while she spoke. "You fix things for a living?" "Yeah, mostly old tech stuff. People don't bother upgrading because they are either stubborn or broke." She nodded thoughtfully. "And you enjoy it?" Theo considered that as he stirred the sauce. "I do. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again." Solara was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I envy that." Theo glanced at her. She was still looking at the old mechanical bird on his shelf, her expression unreadable. He had the sudden feeling that she wasn't talking about fixing machines at all, but before he could say anything, the stove let out an ominous sizzle. Theo turned back just in time to see the sauce bubbling in a way that suggested impending disaster. He grabbed a cloth, muttering, "Not today, kitchen gods, not today," and quickly took the pan off the heat. Solara chuckled. "Are you always this dramatic about cooking?" "Only when the food is actively trying to kill me," Theo said, wiping down the counter. He scooped the noodles onto 2 plates, poured the sauce on top, and stepped back to admire his work. "Well, there it is, my finest creation." He slid a plate towards Solara. "Eat at your own risk." She picked up a fork, twirling a small amount of pasta with a practiced motion. Then she took a bite. Theo watched, waiting for a reaction. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. Then she said with perfect seriousness, "This is the most dangerous thing I've ever done." Theo nearly choked on his own bite. "Wow. Harsh." She smiled, setting down her fork. "I'm joking, it's good." Theo let out an exaggerated sigh of relief. "Good, because my ego is fragile, and I would have had to throw myself into deep space if you hated it." Solara laughed, and for the first time since he met her, it wasn't the polite chuckle of someone humoring a stranger. It was real, warm, unguarded. For a moment, there was no mystery, no weight of unspoken things, just 2 people sharing a meal in a cramped little apartment on the edge of the galaxy. Then Solara's wrist device let out a soft, insistent chime. Her laughter faded. She glanced at the display, and though her expression remained composed, something shifted in her posture, something subtle but unmistakable. Theo frowned. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then stood. "I should take this." She stepped toward the small side room, pressing a button on her wrist device. The door slid shut behind her. Theo stared at his half-finished plate of pasta, a nagging feeling creeping into his chest. He had invited a stranger to dinner, and something told him that stranger wasn't just passing through. Theo leaned back in his chair, idly twirling his fork as he stared at the closed door. Solara had been in there for a few minutes now, and while he wasn't the type to eavesdrop, the silence was unnerving. He'd expected to hear at least some muffled conversation through the thin walls. Station apartments weren't exactly known for their soundproofing. But all he got was dead air. He sighed, shoving another bite of pasta into his mouth. "Probably getting space spam," he muttered to himself. "Congratulations, Solara, you've won a free luxury cruise to the methane lakes of Titan. Just send Us your genetic sequence and we'll book your trip today. He smirked at his own joke but couldn't quite shake the nagging feeling in his gut, something about the way she'd reacted to that message too quick, too practice-like. Someone who had been expecting bad news, not my business, he reminded himself. Just a random dinner with a fascinating stranger, no reason to assume anything. Weird, then, because he had the self-control of a hyperactive lab assistant in a room full of unlabeled buttons. He stood and took a step toward the door. It slid open before he could even think about knocking. Silara stepped out, her face composed but different. The easy amusement from earlier had faded, replaced by something unreadable, calculating, a person slipping back into a role they'd briefly forgotten. Theo blinked. Everything okay? She hesitated just for a fraction of a second, but enough for Theo to catch it. Then she nodded yes, just a small matter to attend to. He raised an eyebrow. Small matter, huh? Because you've got that look. She tilted her head. What look? Though I just got some bad news, but I'm pretending everything's fine. Look, he gestured vaguely. I've seen it a lot. Usually on people who just found out their ship repairs are going to cost twice as much as they thought. Salara's lips twitched, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. You're perceptive, Theo shrugged. I work in a field where people try to lie to me about what's wrong with their ship. Oh no, I definitely didn't override the coolant fail safe. Then why is your engine currently on fire, Greg? This time the smile was real, if only for a second, but then she straightened as if reminding herself of something. I appreciate dinner, she said, her voice carefully neutral. It was unexpected. Theo frowned. That sounds like a very polite way of saying you need to leave now. She hesitated again, then nodded. I do, and just like that the evening, the strange, oddly pleasant detour in Theo's otherwise predictable life, was ending. He didn't know why that bugged him so much. Maybe because it had been a while since he'd had company that wasn't an overworked mechanic or a drunk trader trying to barter with questionable goods, or maybe it was just that Salara was different. Well, he said, scratching the back of his head, I guess I won't keep you then. Salara stepped toward the door but paused. Before it opened, she turned slightly as if weighing something in her mind. Would you walk with me? Theo blinked. Sure. The request was unexpected, but he wasn't about to say no. He grabbed his jacket and followed her out into the corridor. They walked in silence. At first, the station's lower decks were quieter at this hour, the usual hum of voices replaced by the distant thrum of machinery and the occasional buzz of a flickering neon sign. Salara walked with purpose, but not urgency, like someone trying to take in the moment before it slipped away. So Theo said eventually, am I allowed to ask what's going on, or is this one of those if I tell you I have to kill you situations? Salara gave him a sidelong glance. Would you believe me if I said I was a fugitive on the run from intergalactic bounty hunters? Theo considered that I'd be a little hurt. You didn't mention it before dinner. I could have made something fancier that got a laugh, though it was brief. No bounty hunters, she said, but my presence here is complicated. Theo stuffed his hands into his pockets. Well, I can't imagine Ganymede Station is anyone's ideal vacation spot. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowed as they reached a viewing platform, a small semi-private alcove that overlooked the station's docking ring. Through the thick glass, the dark sprawl of space stretched out, dotted with distant ships in the occasional glint of light reflecting off Station Hall's cellar. Exhaled softly. Do you ever look at all of that? She gestured to the stars. And wonder what your place in it is? Theo let out a short laugh. Oh sure, existential crisis is part of the daily routine. He shrugged. I mean, I fix ships for a living. Half the time I'm helping people leave, go somewhere better, and I'm still here eating suspiciously old pasta and hopping my gravity stabilizer doesn't give out. In the middle of the night, Silara studied him for a moment. And you're content with that? Theo thought about it, then nodded. Yeah, I mean, sure, sometimes I wonder what it'd be like to just hop on a ship and go, but I like what I do. I like making things work again. Something in her expression shifted, like she wasn't expecting that answer before she could respond. A low chime echoed through the station, a docking announcement. Silara straightened. I should go. Theo frowned. You keep saying that, but you never actually explain why. She hesitated, then said, because it's safer that way for me or for you. Pause. Both. Theo exhaled. Okay, so I'm definitely never seeing you again, huh? She smiled, small, sad. It's unlikely. Figures. He stuffed his hands into his Pockets? Well, guess I'll just have to tell people I once had dinner with a mysterious alien woman who may or may not have been a fugitive. Silara reached out briefly, touching his arm. Theo, something in her voice made him look at her. If things were different, she said softly, I think I would have liked to stay. Then, before he could reply, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the station's corridors. Theo stood there, watching the place where she'd been, and for the first time in a long time he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he should have asked her to stay. Theo had every intention of going home, cleaning up his kitchen disaster, and pretending that tonight had been nothing more than a weird, fleeting moment in his otherwise predictable life. He really did, but that intention lasted all of 5 minutes, because as soon as he turned away from the docking ring, took about 3 steps toward his apartment and stuffed his hands in his pockets, his fingers brushed against something that most definitely had not been in there before. He stopped, frowned, pulled it out. It was a small, thin device, sleek, metallic, and humming with a faint energy. He turned it over. His hands, no buttons, no visible seams, definitely not something that belonged to him. Theo wasn't a genius, but he wasn't an idiot either. Silara somehow, between dinner, their walk, and that quiet moment before she left, she'd slipped it into his pocket without him noticing. He let out a slow breath, glancing back toward the docking ring as if he'd see her standing there with an apologetic shrug. Of course, she was long gone. Theo muttered a curse under his breath. He should throw it away. That was the smart thing to do, but then again, he'd never been particularly good at doing the smart thing. With a sigh, he turned on his heel and headed back to his apartment, flipping the device over in his fingers. The whole way the device sat on his workbench, staring at him. Theo stared back. All right, he said, leaning back in his chair, so you're either a fancy interstellar pager, a self-destruct beacon, or something that's going to ruin my life. Let's find out which one. With the careful precision of a man who had spent too much time fixing old tech, he tapped the surface experimentally. Nothing. He tried pressing on different spots, seeing if there was some kind of hidden button. Still nothing. Cool, he muttered, real helpful. Then, as if just to prove him wrong, the device let out a soft chime. A tiny seam split open along its surface, and a holographic display flickered to life, projecting a string of unfamiliar symbols into the air. Theo squinted. Oh great, an alien Sudoku puzzle. He didn't recognize the language, but the symbols weren't entirely unfamiliar. Some of them looked vaguely like old diplomatic scripts he'd seen floating around the station. He reached out, swiping a finger through the projection. The symbols shifted, rearranging themselves, then abruptly they translated. If you're reading this, then I have failed. Theo's stomach dropped. Well, that wasn't ominous at all. The message continued, do not try to find me, do not try to return this, keep it hidden. There are those who would kill for what is inside. Theo exhaled sharply. Okay, not great. He glanced around his cluttered apartment as if expecting assassins to burst in at any moment. If you are in danger because of me, I am sorry. That was never my intention. That sounded like Silara. Theo scrubbed a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath, fantastic dinner with a mysterious alien woman, and I somehow end up with a cryptic space message telling me I might die. Should have just stayed home and eaten ration bars. The message flickered. I would have liked to stay. Theo stared at those words for a long time. Then the hologram vanished, the device clicking shut like it had never been opened. For a long moment he just sat there. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. Yeah, okay, this is officially the weirdest week of my life. Theo spent the next hour packing. There were, as far as he could tell, 3 options. Option 1, ignore it, pretend none of this ever happened, go back to fixing ships, eat his questionable pasta leftovers, and hope that Solar's problems didn't become his. Option 2, try to return the device, which, given that he had no idea where Silara had gone, was a terrible plan. Option 3, figure out what exactly was inside this thing that made it so important. Unfortunately, Theo had the curiosity levels of a stray cat near an open fish market, so option 3 was looking pretty inevitable. With a sigh, he grabbed his tools and set to work. It didn't take long to figure out that the device was locked down tight. Whoever had designed it had gone to great lengths to keep prying hands out. It was encrypted with some kind of biometric lock, one that probably required Silara's DNA to open properly, which meant Theo needed a workaround. All right, little mystery box, he muttered, adjusting the calibration on his scanner. Let's see what secrets you're hiding. the first. Few attempts got him nowhere. The encryption was complex, more advanced than anything he usually dealt with. Whoever had built this thing wasn't playing around, but Theo was nothing if not stubborn. After about an hour of fiddling, he managed to isolate a faint energy signature buried deep within the device, something separate from the encryption, something stored in a hidden partition. Theo's stomach twisted. It was a distress signal, and it had been sent recently. His heart pounded. If Salara had activated it before slipping the device to him, that meant someone else knew, and if someone else knew, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Theo froze. The knock came again, sharp, impatient. His mind raced. It was late. No one visited him unannounced, and somehow he knew whoever was on the other side of that door. They weren't here for a repair job. Slowly, carefully, Theo reached for the device, tucking it into his jacket. Then he stepped toward the door, every muscle tense. The knocking stopped for a moment. Silence. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down his spine, someone said, "Theo Whitaker, we know you have it." Theo exhaled sharply. "Well," he muttered to himself, "guess I'm not finishing my pasta." Then, because his night wasn't already bad enough, the door lock let out a sharp click and started to open. Theo had a split second to decide: fight, run, or somehow convince the undoubtedly dangerous people outside his door that he was just a humble mechanic who had no idea what they were talking about, given that his only real combat experience involved wrestling a stubborn fuel valve out of a corroded socket. Fight was off the table. Running wasn't much better. His apartment was on the lower decks of Ganymede Station, and unless he suddenly developed the ability to phase through walls, he was trapped, which left him with exactly one option: bluff. Taking a deep breath, he forced a casual, almost bored expression onto his face and leaned against the door frame just as it slid open. 3 figures stood in the hallway. The one in front was tall, wrapped in an angular black coat that practically screamed bad news. His skin had a faint silvery sheen, like someone had mixed liquid mercury with human DNA. His eyes were cold and unreadable. The two behind him were less subtle, broad-shouldered, armored, and carrying weapons that were just barely small enough to be considered concealable. Fantastic. Theo crossed his arms and arched an eyebrow. "You guys are a little late. I already bought all my vacuum-sealed steak subscriptions for the month." The leader didn't react. "You have something that does not belong to you." Theo let out an exaggerated sigh. "Buddy, if this is about that hydro spanner I borrowed from Greg, I swear I was going to give it back." No response. Theo cleared his throat. "Tough crowd." The leader took a step forward, and suddenly Theo felt very aware of the fact that he was outnumbered, unarmed, and currently blocking the doorway to his own apartment. "You were seen with her," the man continued, voice but icy. "She gave you something. We will have it now." Theo gave him his best confused idiot face. She going to need more details. I meet a lot of people. Are we talking about the guy who tried to pay me and counterfeit credits last week, or the lady who swore she'd fixed her ship's coolant system before I had to put out an engine fire?" The man's expression darkened. The Princess Theo definitely did not like how he said that. "So yeah, this was about Salara." He could feel the device's weight against his chest, tucked safely inside his jacket. He had no idea what was on it. Only that Salara had trusted him with it, which meant giving it up was not an option. He shrugged. "No princesses here, pal. Just me, my questionable life choices, and a kitchen sink that clogs at the worst possible moments." The leader studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he raised a hand. One of the armored guys reached for something on his belt. Theo braced himself, and then his lights flickered for a second. Everything dimmed. The hum of the station systems hiccuping. The leader's expression shifted. "What was that?" Theo blinked. "A rolling power failure. Pretty normal down here. It's a feature, really adds excitement to your everyday routine." Another flicker. This time the light stayed dim, casting the hallway a faint reddish glow. Then, to Theo's absolute shock, a voice crackled over the intercom. A familiar voice. "Theo Whitaker, you are in danger." Theo's stomach flipped. Salara, the leader's face twisted into something downright murderous. "Find the source now." His 2 goons immediately moved, pulling out scanners. Theo, meanwhile, was still trying to process the fact that Salara was somehow speaking through the station's entire intercom system. "They are not station security. They are here for me, and now for you." "Oh great," Theo muttered. "Love that for me." One of the goons snapped his Attention back to Theo, grabbing his arm. You will come with us. Theo did not like that plan, but before he could protest that, the station lights flared just for a second, blindingly bright, then they cut out completely. A loud bang echoed through the hallway, a sharp curse, then chaos. Theo felt the grip on his arm loosen as something or someone slammed into the goon holding him. He stumbled back, heart pounding, trying to get his bearings. In the sudden darkness, a hand grabbed his wrist, not aggressively, not hostile, just firm, steady. Then a voice right by his ear. Run, Theo. Definitely didn't need to be told twice. The emergency lighting flickered on as Theo and Salara ducked into a side corridor. He was breathless, half in shock, half trying to process what had just happened. How, what, why are you even shot him? A look later. Keep moving, Theo groaned, but followed. You hacked the station's intercom system. I needed a distraction. Theo exhaled. Okay, that's cool, reckless, but cool. They turned another corner, heading toward the lower docking bays. Theo risked a glance at her. She looked different, not just in expression, but in presence. Gone was the casually amused woman he'd shared dinner with. Now she looked sharp, focused, like someone who had just put aside something heavy and finally remembered who they really were. Theo swallowed. So, just going to come out and say it? You're actually a princess, huh? Salara smirked. You invited a royal to dinner. Congratulations. Theo ran a hand through his hair. Fantastic. Do I get a medal, or just a lifetime supply of bad decisions? Depends, she said. Do you still have the device? Theo patted his jacket. Yep. Also, you really should have warned me that carrying this thing would attract heavily armed murder squads. I didn't plan on leaving it with you, she admitted, but I needed to send a distress signal without them tracking it back to me. Theo narrowed his eyes. Who are they? Her expression darkened. People who want to control what I have and who I am. Neat, love that. Definitely not terrifying at all. They reached a maintenance hatch. Salara pulled it open, revealing a cramped access tunnel. Theo sighed. Of course, crawling through a tunnel, exactly how I wanted my night to end. Sierra arched an eyebrow. Would you prefer they catch us? No, I'm good, with a dramatic groan. Theo climbed in after her as the hatch sealed behind them. He had exactly one thought: he was in way over his head. And somehow this was still better than his usual Tuesday night. Theo did not enjoy crawling through tight, dimly lit maintenance tunnels. He would have loved to pretend he was the kind of guy who thrived in high-stakes situations. Cool, collected, effortlessly competent, but unfortunately reality had decided he was more of a panicked, muttering and occasional knee-scraping kind of guy. Just so you know, he grumbled, voice muffled as he shuffled forward. I'm never inviting another mysterious woman to dinner again. Ahead of him, Salara didn't even look back. That's a shame. You have a certain charm. Theo snorted. Yeah, I get that a lot, usually right before something explodes. They reached a junction in the tunnel where a faint blue emergency light flickered above them. Salara hesitated, tilting her head slightly as if listening for something. Theo did not like that. Everything okay, he whispered. Salara glanced at him, then pointed up. We're almost at the secondary docking bay. If we can get to a ship, we can. A deep metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. Theo froze. Please tell me that was just the station settling. Salara's expression said otherwise. Another clang, closer this time. Theo exhaled sharply. Great love, that definitely not terrifying. Salara pressed a hand against the wall, feeling the vibrations through the metal. They're trying to cut off our escape routes. Theo muttered under his breath. Of course they are. Then, because life really seemed determined to make his night worse, the floor beneath them gave a sudden violent jolt. Theo yelped as he lost his balance, tumbling sideways into Salara. She barely managed to catch herself before they both went sprawling. What was that? Theo hissed. Salara narrowed her eyes. The station's artificial gravity just fluctuated. Theo groaned. You mean to tell me that on top of getting hunted by scary space mercenaries, the station itself is now trying to kill me? Salara smirked. You do seem to have that kind of luck. Before Theo could argue, a harsh, distorted voice crackled through the tunnel's calm speakers. You're trapped. There is nowhere to go. Theo stiffened. Solar's expression darkened. They're routing through the station's internal systems. Theo exhaled. Okay, well, that's horrifying. The voice continued, a cold mechanical distortion lacing its words. Turn over the device, turn over the princess, you will not be harmed. Theo exchanged a look with Salara. then he made a face. Oh yeah, that definitely sounds super trustworthy. Silara smirked. I can't imagine why you wouldn't believe them. Theo glanced down at the device, still hidden inside his jacket. He barely understood what was on it, but if these people wanted it this badly, there was no way in hell he was handing it over. He squared his shoulders, doing his best to sound more confident than he felt. Yeah, thanks for the offer, but I think we'll pass. Silence, then the voice replied low, almost amused. You misunderstand, this is not a negotiation. Theo barely had time to register the warning before the entire tunnel shook. A low metallic groan rippled through the walls. Theo's stomach dropped. Oh, that's bad. Salara's eyes widened, they're destabilizing the pressure seals. Theo did not like the sound of that. Okay, and that means they're venting this section into space. Theo let out a strangled noise. I hate this station. Salara grabbed his wrist. Move. They scrambled forward, half crawling, half sliding as the tunnel shook around them. Behind them, the air started to thin just slightly, but enough for Theo's ears to pop painfully. We're going to suffocate, aren't we? Theo panted. Not if we make it out first, Salara shot back. Theo groaned. Not exactly reassuring. Up ahead, Salara spotted a hatch leading into the maintenance corridor. She reached for it. Gripping the manual release lever, it didn't budge. Her jaw clenched. They've locked it remotely. Theo let out a frustrated breath. Of course they did. The air was getting thinner now. His head felt light, his limbs sluggish. He pressed a hand against the wall, forcing himself to think. Then suddenly an idea. It was a bad idea, possibly the worst idea he'd ever had, but it was all they had. Theo reached into his jacket, pulling out the device. Salar frowned. What are you? Trust me, Theo muttered. He turned it over in his hands, scanning its surface. The last time he'd activated it, it had translated a message, but if it could send signals, Theo exhaled sharply. Come on. Little space puzzle, work with me here. He pressed his thumb against its surface. The device let out a faint hum. Salara tensed. Theo, whatever you're doing. Working on it. The device flickered for a moment, nothing, then abruptly every light in the tunnel flared. Theo flinched, spots dancing in his vision. The air crackled with energy, a low frequency were vibrating through the walls. Then the hatch unlocked. Theo's breath caught. Salar wasted no time. She yanked the hatch open, grabbing Theo's arm and pulling him through just as the tunnel behind them ruptured for one terrifying second. Theo felt the pull of vacuum, the roar of escaping air, then the hatch slammed shut. Theo collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Okay, that sucked. Sierra was already on her feet, staring at him. What did you do? Theo let out a weak laugh. I think I just used this thing to override their lockout. Silara stared at the device in his hands, then to Theo's absolute shock she grinned. Well, she said, offering him a hand. That's useful. Theo groaned as she pulled him up. I am so getting hazard pay after this. Silara smirked. Are you number? No, I'm definitely not. Silara's gaze flickered toward the corridor ahead. Come on, we're not safe yet. Theo sighed. Right, because running for my life wasn't already my full-time job tonight. Despite everything, Silara chuckled, and then together they ran. Theo had officially reached his limit between dodging armed mercenaries, nearly suffocating in a rapidly decompressing maintenance tunnel, and hacking an alien device with absolutely no idea how it worked. He was about 10 seconds away from collapsing in a corner and accepting whatever fate had in store for him, but unfortunately Salara wasn't giving him that option. This way, she ordered, pulling him down a side corridor. Theo groaned. You keep saying that like I have other options. They skidded into a dimly lit service bay, its walls lined with spare parts and half-disassembled cargo drones. At the far end sat a sleek, narrow craft. A small jump ship, its hull marked with insignia. Theo didn't recognize. Theo let out a breath. Tell me that thing flies. Silara smirked. It flies. Theo raised a skeptical eyebrow. And you own it, right? I don't need more grand theft spaceship charges on my non-existent criminal record. Seller gave him a look. It's borrowed. Theo sighed. Of course it is. Behind them, distant shouts echoed through the station's corridors. Salara pressed a panel on the ship's hull, and the boarding ramp extended with a hiss. Move. Theo didn't argue. They sprinted aboard, and the moment Salara hit the cockpit controls, the ship hummed to life. Theo collapsed into the co-pilot seat, gasping for breath. You know, I was not built for this much cardio. Salara ignored him, fingers flying over the ship's interface. Strap in. Theo barely Had time to fumble with the harness before the ship lurched upward, its engines roaring as it shot out of the bay. Theo yelped, warning, next time maybe. Would you prefer I took my time? Salar asked dryly, pulling the ship into a sharp bank as warning alarms flared across the dashboard. Theo gritted his teeth. You know what number? No, this is fine, just another normal Tuesday. The station's defense grid kicked in, automated turrets tracking their escape. Theo's stomach dropped. Salara, we have company. Salara's expression didn't waver. Hold on. The ship rolled just as the first blast seared past their hull, missing by inches. Theo's grip on his seat tightened. Oh sure, just casually. Dodge laser fire, no big deal. Sailor didn't answer, she was too focused. Her gaze locked on the swirling debris field ahead. Theo frowned. Wait, you're not actually flying into that, are you? Salara smirked. Would you rather stay here? We. Point taken. With a sharp whoosh, they plunged into the debris field, weaving between broken hulls and drifting cargo containers. The station's defenses hesitated their targeting system, struggling to lock onto a ship that was now very much not flying in a straight line. Theo let out a shaky breath. Remind me to never question your piloting again. Salara didn't respond because at that moment something else appeared on the scanners. A ship, a very large ship. Theo's stomach twisted. A friend, or before he could finish the sentence, the ship's calm crackled to life. Princess Salara, your signal was received. Stand by for docking. Theo blinked. Salara exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing. We made it. Theo frowned. Wait, hold on, who exactly are we docking with? Salara turned to him, a small smile playing at her lips. My allies. 20 minutes later, Theo found himself standing on the bridge of a very fancy, very royal starship, feeling extremely out of place. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, their uniforms crisp, their manner disciplined. Theo, meanwhile, was still wearing an oil-stained jacket and had at least 3 new bruises. A tall, imposing figure approached, an older man with sharp features and an unmistakable air of authority. Theo tensed. The man studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. You must be Theo Whitaker. Theo hesitated. Yeah, and you are the man. Inclined his head. Admiral Vior, loyal to the princess. Theo glanced at Salara. You do have friends? Salara arched an eyebrow. Surprised. Theo shrugged. Honestly, little bit. Vior turned back to Salara, his expression shifting to something more serious. Your message contained more than just a distress signal. Salara nodded. I have evidence, proof that the council's been compromised. Theo frowned. Wait, the council, as in the people currently in charge of your home world? Sailor's expression darkened. They weren't just after me, they were after this. She reached into Theo's jacket and pulled out the device. Theo gasped. Excuse me, that was in my pocket. You could have asked. Salara smirked. And risk you saying no? Theo huffed. Unbelievable. Vior meanwhile studied the device. If what you claim is true, this could change everything. Salara nodded. That's the plan. Theo shifted uncomfortably. So, what happens now? Salara turned to him, and for the first time there was something soft in her gaze. I go home, she said simply, and I make things right. Theo swallowed. And me? She tilted her head. That depends. Would you rather go back to fixing engines on a backwater station? Theo hesitated, then finally he sighed. Okay, yeah, that does sound terrible. Salara chuckled. In that case, how would you feel about an adventure? Theo eyed her wearily. Does this adventure involve less running for my life? Salara smiled. No promises. Theo groaned. Figures, but despite himself he smiled too, because somehow against all odds he'd gone from a nobody mechanic on Ganymede Station to a guy standing on a royal flagship, holding a device that could change the fate of an entire planet. And for once he wasn't just fixing broken engines, he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. Theo took a deep breath, then grinned. Well, he said, at least dinner was interesting. The end.